Every story begins with a spark. A single page, a single voice, a single chapter. Welcome to Chapter 1, where our authors take you on the journey in their own words. Settle in, listen closely. This is where the adventure begins.
Hi, I'm Tia Simons and I'm the author of Project Hemisphere, the first book in the Antipodes series. There are 5 books in the Antipodes series: The Space Between, Ouroboros, Cam or Circle of Protection, and Sesrum Near. And today I'm going to read Chapter 1 from Project Hemisphere. The low drone was relentless, reverberating through my skull. I dared to crack open one eye and a beam of white light crippled me, forcing me to curl into the fetal position. I groaned as I heard the sound. Someone vacuuming a particularly dirty section of the hallway rug right outside my bedroom door. I recognised the masterful handiwork of my mother. Mum derived a perverse sense of pleasure in torturing me when I was sick, especially if it was in the self-inflicted variety. The subterranean growl my inebriated brain thought I'd heard while failing to sneak in at 3 a.m. and tripping over the cat clearly meant that I had indeed woken her when I fell with full force into the hallway wall. Merlin had gleefully registered someone awake as breakfast time and yowled at the top of his lungs. That cat had no off switch. My choices at that point were limited: clatter around the kitchen, feeding the cat, or allowing him to follow me to bed, purring like a chainsaw, walking on my belly, and pushing random items off the dresser until I succumbed. Like all rescue cats, Merlin considered himself a black furry god, so like a good servant, I shuffled around the kitchen in the dark to open the noisy pest a can. Wafts of tuna atop a belly full of beer and kebab made me gag, so I bolted. Loud rumbles of contentment echoed down the hallway as I shuffled to my room, trying not to wake my family in that exaggerated way that one does when they're extremely intoxicated. Thus, the excruciatingly loud vacuuming at stupid o'clock on a Sunday morning. Still, trying to avoid the bright light from my window, I glanced at my watch. 8:05 a.m. An indication that Mum was still not impressed at being woken. 10 minutes later, Mum still hadn't managed to dislodge that stubborn bit of dirt from outside my room. I knew the futility of avoiding my fate. Mum had been born and raised in a small community on Lewis, a remote island in the Outer Hebrides off the northwest coast of Scotland. The determined Scot streak in her had never waned, despite living here for more than 20 years after she met my Scots-born, Australian-raised dad while he was backpacking and visiting his relatives in Scotland. Mum readily admitted that at the time she was desperate to escape her small island, small town existence. The occasional subtle dig from my father indicated Mum was a wild child and left some carnage in her wake before she met my dad and moved to Australia. Small town living was clearly not suited to her. When we were young, Mum returned to university and completed her teaching degree. Now she was a principal. I had absolutely no doubt that the kids at her primary school were absolutely scared shitless of her. Despite her heart of gold and inability to walk past person, child, or animal in need, she still hadn't lost the sharp accent, the acerbic wit, nor the ability to reduce a fool stupid enough to take her on to a withered mass within minutes. If eyes were the window to the soul, they also expressed a spectrum of emotions. Mum possessed an arsenal of rather creative tactics to express her displeasure. Nothing as mundane as yelling. Since no torture felt worse than those moments spent lying in bed trying to decide whether to get up and go to the bathroom, or continue lying there trying to sleep but desperately needing to piss, I finally got up. "Morning!" Mum chirped over the vacuum's roar as I staggered past, misjudged the corner and banged my elbow, finally closed the door to the bathroom firmly behind me. Dropping my head, I groaned loudly, my long fringe falling across my face. Torture tactic number 2 had commenced. Excessive chirpiness until I told her where I was last night, who I was with, and what I was doing. At least she had the decency to turn off the vacuum cleaner. "Oh, Campbell, you finally graced us with your presence. What are you up to today?" The prying questions continued as I shuffled from the bathroom to the kitchen, aspirin in hand, trying to respond, but unable to dislodge the dry, furry throat without a drink. I ended up grunting a monosyllabic response in her general direction that came out remotely like the desired word. Sleep. Sorka was sitting on the bench at the kitchen table, her back to the window. She had a cup of coffee in hand and an empty cereal bowl to the right of the newspaper she was reading. Despite paying bills, shopping, and performing most day-to-day transactions online, my parents were still old school. They still enjoyed having the weekend paper delivered. Facing the kitchen door where I entered, my sister was so engrossed in the paper, she barely registered my existence. We'd never been close. Not since we were young. Contemplating cooking a breakfast to set on my throbbing head and queasy stomach, I realised I'd need to clean up afterwards. So rather than face the chore of scrubbing a greasy fry pan, I settled for toast and coffee. The coffee machine whirred as it ground the beans, and I cringed as the noise pierced my skull, making me clutch my head, grimacing in pain. Filling a glass of water from the tap, I gazed blearily at the painkillers in my hand, wishing they could alleviate the pain in my head by osmosis as I waited for the toaster. It's funny how 2 tiny little white tablets can ease so much. Tilting my head back, I dropped them into the back of my throat, washing them down with a gulp of water. Cup and plate in hand, I finally flopped into the chair opposite Sorka. Toast and coffee should be granted official medicinal status, I thought absently. There is absolutely no situation that cannot be improved with the addition of hot, buttery toast and strong coffee. "Where's Dad?" I asked Sorka between mouthfuls, the coffee reviving me into some semblance of humanity. She wrinkled her nose at the interruption, but responded without glancing up. "The block." Dad had always loved taking us camping. Dad was a different person in the bush. He just blended in. It was like Dad fit somehow, evolving into something completely different. Dad loved it all, fishing, cooking on open-air fires, hiking in the mountains, and he'd loved teaching us how to be self-sufficient. For years, he'd refused to own a dumb phone, responding with, "Smartphone? Dumb user." Nothing could be further than the truth. He had an immense knowledge of medicine, history, and obscure topics that made him an interesting man to talk to. Often I'd wondered why he chose a career as a paramedic in the city when he was so clearly better suited to farming or rural life, or even a career in academia. Dad had immense knowledge and interest in World War I history and had allegedly dragged Mum all over Europe to see historical sites like the Menin Gate, the Somme, and Villa-Bernier on their honeymoon. Despite sharing his love of history, Mum's particular area of interest was Celtic and Pict archaeology. But Mum was a city creature. She loved shops, cinemas, and people. Mum couldn't stop by the supermarket to buy milk without striking up a conversation with a stranger about some arbitrary topic. Shopping with her was a veritable nightmare, as she would end up trying to draw me into the conversation, and I ended up being forced to share highly embarrassing anecdotes from my childhood. I refused to shop with her when she regressed to chatting with people who adopted her as a kindred spirit in the pet food aisle. That whole section between cat food and laundry liquid was a quagmire, well best avoided. Most years, Mum would invite strays to join us at Christmas dinner. Random people, those new to the city with no family. Homeless people she harassed into coming along. Goodness knows where she found them. Probably buying cat food with a lot of solitary lean cuisine in their trolley, the beacon of a lone dweller. Mum could spot a lonely person a mile off. Mum was the type of person who, if somebody arrived during dinner, she would take a small portion from everyone's plate until she could feed them. Refusing to get rid of old coats, she'd run a collection, donating winter coats every year to those in need. Warm and caring, cajoling, or blatantly manipulative, Mum had a way of getting what she wanted. But people loved her and said she had a heart of gold. My pounding head, eardrum still vibrating from the vacuum cleaner, wasn't convinced. Sorka, 3 years older than me and now in her final year of a postgraduate medical degree, worked part-time as a university tutor. She claimed she didn't have time to go camping anymore, but she'd never really enjoyed it. I'd long suspected that Dad had always known that, but being the eternal diplomat, he never said a word. He welcomed her and enjoyed her company. He nodded sagely when she finally plucked up the courage and told him she didn't want her spend her weekends at Out Bush Block anymore. The block, as we'd called it, from the time my parents bought it 12 years ago, was 5 acres of blue gum and candlebark trees, just over 3 hours' drive from our Melbourne home in the middle of nowhere, on the back road to Mount Buller. We had debated names for hours, arguing over the merits of each, but couldn't reach a consensus. Mum finally ended the debate by stating that the property would name itself, and the name would become apparent when it was time. It hadn't. Now, it was just too embarrassing to try. I'd long suspected that no one else wanted this particular piece of bushland when my parents bought it, dead cheap, at the end of a dirt track over a kilometre off the nearest road and surrounded by state forest. I was 10 when they made the purchase, old enough to roam the forest for hours on a trail bike during my school holidays and long weekends, making slingshots, climbing trees, enjoying bushfires at night with the toasted marshmallows. For Dad, it was his nirvana, and he loved being there like nothing else on earth. Despite the years we'd owned it, the lot was still mostly native forest, with a small 2-room cottage we'd built from scratch. Surrounded by a forest of eucalypts, with soaring tree ferns, bracken and ground cover, over the past few years Dad had begun clearing and had planted a mixed orchard and a decent-sized vegetable patch. He was still working out what grew well and what didn't. Keeping the local wildlife from snacking was an ongoing issue, requiring creative fencing solutions. Wallabies, wombats, koalas, even deer regularly came by to help themselves to dinner. The possums got most of the cherries, even with sheets of metal clad around the trees to hinder their climbing, so after 2 seasons of failure, he finally gave up with them, letting the possums have them. There was no point in ripping them out after all. Stone fruit grew well, but he simply couldn't get lemons to grow. Finally, Mum had said, "You could have bought a lot of lemons with the money you spent on citrus trees." Dad rolled his eyes and said nothing, but I noted he stuck to stone fruit after that. I'm still unable to describe why, but I loved it there so much. Like Dad, I felt a bond, a connection to the peace of the bush, the sounds of lyrebirds calling, the wind in the trees. I always felt a lingering sense of sadness when I left. Seated at the kitchen table, food in my stomach, I pondered what to do with my Sunday. My head was still throbbing from the previous night's adventures when I'd celebrated my 23rd birthday with my agricultural science friends from Melbourne University. Although I wasn't a massive fan of noisy clubs, I knew I needed to do what normal people did, so I went along with the plan. I was now in my honours year and contemplating what to do next. Look for a job, postgrad study, or my usual course of action. Wait and see what landed in my lap. We'd been back at university for a week, and I'd enjoyed catching up with friends and acquaintances after the summer holidays before knuckling down to my thesis. Most of us had jobs to help fund the reality of undergraduate study. I considered myself lucky. I still lived at home, didn't pay rent or bills, but working part-time at a wholesale plant nursery helped provide a much-needed source of disposable income, plus a staff discount that Dad regularly put to good use. Working with plants was therapeutic, and one of the reasons I was seriously contemplating a career in global food security, despite not really knowing how to make that idea a reality. There'd be time for those decisions in a few months. So last night, copious amounts of alcohol had been consumed, as well as the obligatory late-night kebab, on my way home. So glancing down at my empty coffee cup, I pondered the merits of a second. Snorker looked up from the newspaper, belatedly acknowledging my existence, and asked if I'd seen the news. My general policy was to avoid the news, as I found it highly political and thus boring. Shaking my head, I knew where this was going. She had the look. The derisive way her eyes narrowed and nostrils flared indicated she was about to launch into yet another monotonous academic lecture about the merits of some obscure scientific theory, spotlighting her vast medical training while simultaneously proving, beyond doubt, to the world at large that I was indeed a complete moron. To my surprise, instead of lecturing me, Snorker folded back the paper to expose the front page. A large headline loomed. Unknown virus kills hundreds. Squinting through my headache, I scanned the slightly blurred first paragraph. An unidentified epidemic was spreading across several countries in Europe, killing people, animals, aquatic life, and plants. Continued page 3. Looking up, I shrugged at her. So? Don't you get it? She sneered, unable to contain her incredulity. In the space of 15 seconds, I've proven myself to be the cretin she evidently believed I was. You do study biology, right? Remind me to have a chat with Carter about reviewing your grades. Ha, clearly not to the same level as you, Dr. Mackintosh, I retorted, planning to enlighten me. Rolling her eyes in exaggerated exasperation, she adopted the tone one uses when speaking to a child, or an idiot. Both in this case. I wondered if she talked to her recalcitrant students like this, doubting it would have much effect on them either. The virus is in the water, she explained, very slowly, so the stupid among us could catch on. Okay, I replied hesitantly. So? It's spreading, Sorka sniped caustically. Rapidly. Okay, but it's in Europe, I countered sarcastically. Not exactly next door. Surely it can be contained. That's precisely the problem. How do you contain something in waterways? The World Health Organization is saying that it started in the Danube, and within a few weeks it's killing people all over Europe. Did you learn about Brownian motion at school? You know, particles suspended in liquid spread and move randomly? Sure, but then it dilutes, right? Well, that's where this one's different. This epidemic, they're calling it the Vienna virus, by the way, because that's where the first known death occurred. It seems to multiply, and scientists yet can't work out how. There are hundreds of people dead already, and many more than that infected. None of them survive, though, once infected. Though I desperately wanted to needle her, I just didn't have the energy. Look, I get I need to read the article. Just tell me the basics. I mean, we've survived swine flu, avian flu, SARS. How bad is it, really? Glancing back at the paper, she read, 2,850 kilometres of waterways, crosses 11 countries. If it spreads into all of those countries' waterways and eventually into the ocean, it'll end up in the Black Sea. Well, that's not too bad, is it? I countered, my limited geographical knowledge kicking in. Isn't the Black Sea the one that's fully contained? Nope. The Black Sea is navigable to the Atlantic Ocean. Oh. The word came out like a deflating tyre. I had nothing to say to that. I sat and stared at Sorka, dumbfounded. Some critics are saying this is Malthusian's theory in practice. Scratching my still aching temple, I tried to recall who Malthus was, not wanting to appear a bigger idiot in front of my judgmental sister. That's the guy that said that the population increases at a faster rate than its ability to feed itself, right? That's him. He also said that unless the population is kept in check with moral restraints like celibacy, or by disease, famine, war, or natural disaster, then the population will continue to experience widespread poverty and will never achieve utopia. Happy bloke, I commented cheerily. Must have been great fun at dinner parties. The door to the kitchen opened and Mum backed in, dragging the vacuum behind her. As she turned it on and it roared into life, this effectively prevented any further conversation. Sorka returned to her newspaper, and I decided a second cup of coffee was warranted, the noise of the grinder no longer an impediment. Going back to bed wasn't an option, nor was continuing to endure Mum's interrogation. Years of experience told me she was not yet finished with me. Mum finished up the floors in the kitchen as I was steaming the milk. Wiping down the machine after years of being nagged into cleaning up as I went, I watched Mum move into the lounge room, and I firmly closed the door behind her, sitting down with my now full steaming cup, and placed a second in front of Sorka. She looked up with me surprise, but smiled her thanks. She and I sat in silence for several more minutes before she looked up again. Well, are you going? Going? Where? Another loud and overly exaggerated sigh responded before she pushed the paper in front of me, displaying a half-page advertisement. My head still hurt, and I couldn't focus my eyes on the slightly blurred fine print, so I pushed it back. Call me stupid. Just summarize it for me. Sorka rolled her eyes. This is everywhere. Papers, TV, email, through the university faculty. I must have received it 6 times already. Don't you have a phone? Don't you check your email? A light bulb went off in my head. Remembering that my phone had gone flat the previous night, I stood and picked it up from the bench where I dropped it in with my wallet and keys the night before and plugged it in. Within seconds, the distinct pinging of messages, email and SMS reverberated around the kitchen. Just tell me, I wheezed with exaggerated drama as I fell back into the chair opposite her. Sorka took a deep breath and read. It's an official announcement from the Commonwealth Department of Innovation and Science. They're seeking people to attend a briefing at their primary site in Melbourne. Very specific skills, set age ranges. You need to register online. Misreading the cues, I asked, do you want to go together? I'm busy, she snapped. I have a class at 9. You don't have classes until the afternoon, so you should see what it's all about. You meet the criteria. Well, apart from the not being an idiot part, which I neglected to mention as a deal breaker. So, you go, then you can call me. There are multiple session times anyway. I'll go to the evening one, if it isn't wasting my time. Ignoring her taunt, I clicked on the link in one of my countless messages, registering my expression of interest. An automated reply pinged back, noting my booking for a bus departing the university campus at 8:30 a.m. Excellent. I could go and be back in time for my afternoon class.
The first chapter has been read, but the story has only just begun. Join us again for more voices, more worlds, more Chapter 1.